Authentic Assessment, a case study by Michelle Chelvanayagam. When I was young, grades were extremely important. So from a very young age, I learned skills and tools to help me excel and do well on traditional tests. You know, the multiple choice, fill in the blanks. I was a master memorizer, but these skills and tools that I had really served me no purpose once I left school. I've come a very long way from the young girl I used to be. And today, as an educator, the more I learn, the more I realize that traditional tests fall short in assessing the skills and abilities that students need to develop in order to be successful in life. Most educators would argue that there's a demand for a kind of education that encourages students to do more than just memorize information and use it to solve neatly constructed problems. And dun-dun-dun-dun, this is where authentic assessment comes into play. Experts in the field, such as Grant Wiggins, believed that assessment is authentic when we directly examine students' performance on worthy intellectual tasks. Wendy Barber believes that assessment is defined within the context of stimulating, authentic, life-related tasks. Thus, authentic assessment provides students with the opportunity to demonstrate their understanding in the context of a real-world scenario that they may one day encounter. Traditional tests call students to recall and recognize information in a contrived way and looks for the right answers. Overall, it's a fairly inaccurate measure of student knowledge. On the other hand, authentic assessment is meaningful, seamless with learning, often constructed by the students, is ill-defined, and looks for justified answers and polished products. It's accurate, but most of all, it's real. I'm sure you've noticed a trend in the video right now. Two words keep coming up: real and life. It keeps coming up because, as educators, our goal isn't to make sure our students are going to be successful in school. We want them to be successful in real life. Yay! Oops, that should be life, not life. So for my case study, I'm going to focus on providing assessment that has a real-world application. And because I'm an occasional teacher, unfortunately, my assessment opportunities are limited to administering tests for other teachers. So I'm actually going to start my story back when I was a teacher candidate. So for my practicum, I had a grade 6 class, and on my first day, my associate teacher handed me the math curriculum and said, "You're going to teach number sense and numeration. It's my least favorite unit to teach, so I'm so glad you're here." And she was just like, ha ha ha. I was really nervous, so that night I went home and looked online about how to teach the unit. A lot of websites broke down the concepts and kept mentioning to use base 10 blocks and manipulatives to help students understand. I don't think I slept at all that night, but I felt confident that I knew how to do this. The next morning, I went to school and I was like, I got this. I set up shop and started my lesson. But there was a young boy who was a bit of a smart aleck, and in the middle of my lesson, he interrupted me and asked, but miss, why do we even need to know this? This smart aleck raised a really important question that I failed to think about. I was so focused on what students needed to know, I didn't even think about why. As adults, our understanding of number sense and numeration is something we use on a day-to-day basis. But in grade 6, students weren't babies, but they hadn't lived much life to relate to. This can be something really difficult when trying to find a real-life application for knowledge that begins as a foundation and becomes more and more complex throughout the years. However, it's still really important to find ways to introduce students to how they will use what they are learning in the future. So I went back to the drawing board, pun intended, and I really thought about what students were learning and why it was important. This unit in particular was important to helping students understand the meaning of a number. Throughout the unit, I created authentic activities that applied what the students were learning to the real world. This sometimes involved things that they may or may not have been familiar with: checkbooks, budgets, bank statements. What I did notice was that the students were engaged and the learning that was taking place was meaningful. With the advice of my associate teacher, I implemented a lot of problem-based learning. I would often give my students incorrect work and answers and allow them to break down the error in thought processes and identify common mistakes. But The great thing was that this still connected to real life. So after a month of seeing and hearing evidence that students had developed a strong foundation of knowledge, and me providing opportunities for feedback, I presented my class with their final assessment. It took a little convincing to get my AT to come around, but for the final project, the students would be planning a party or an event. There were many components involved. The students were responsible for researching different vendors to determine entertainment, venue, catering, decorations. They were also responsible for providing a budget and writing checks for vendors, calculating cash deposits for certain amounts. They needed to estimate the costs and compare prices between different companies. Overall, this assessment found a way for students to apply everything they had learned through the course of this unit in a way that was applicable to the real world. And guess what? The results were fantastic. Even better, the students were so proud of their final project. My mate AT actually said that these were the best presentations she had seen all year, and one group even presented to the principal for a proposal to have a fun fair at the end of the year. So the take home here is that assessment isn't about giving your students an A, a B, or a C. It's about determining where they are and how you can get them to where they need to be in order to be successful in life. It's so important for students to relate what they're learning in school to the real world. And for this reason, I challenge you educators to always ask yourself the question, is this real life? The end.